What if I told you that the most remote point of ocean in the world is named after a fish? Well, actually, it's not, but it would make for a good story. This is the story of Point Nemo, which is the most remote point in the ocean. It's basically the extremest point of inaccessibility in the world's oceans. Point Nemo is located at 48 degrees, 52 minutes south and 123 degrees and 23 minutes west in the South Pacific Ocean. And judge it, 48 degrees south is pretty far south, and it is pretty cold area. Now, Point Nemo is not actually named after the fish. And by the way, for what it's worth, the fish itself probably couldn't survive there because most of them don't. The reason why it's named after is named Point Nemo is because it's actually named for Captain Nemo from 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea from Jules Verne. And the Croatian engineer who discovered it using OpenStreetMaps and Google Maps sources of all things in 1992 named it so because he had an affinity for the book. And so he named it after Captain Nemo. So it's Point Nemo. And Point Nemo is also, it's so far from any land mass of any kind. The reason why fish can't survive there, so poor Nemo would have an impossible time there if the cartoon Nemo actually did live there, is because it's so far from land that there's no nutrient runoff from land into this part of the ocean at all. There's almost none. And so marine life is practically non-existent here. It's also obviously very far from any human life. It's very far from any animal life, and therefore this point has a very special purpose. It is the crashing site of space junk, satellites that are deorbited and crashing into the Earth. It is where the International Space Station itself is targeted to be deorbited into in the year 2031. Speaking of the International Space Station, when the closest humans to Point Nemo are often when the International Space Station itself is orbiting over Point Nemo. And at this point, they're about 230 miles above the point, and the nearest land masses are 1,600 miles in any direction. So space stations doesn't have to be that particularly close or even directly over Point Nemo for this to be true. It just has to be within, about 1,000 miles of it, as far as latitude and longitude coordinates is concerned, over the site, for it to be for those men and women on the ISS to be closer to Point Nemo than anybody on land. Basically, the main closest land to Point Nemo is the southernmost of what are called the Line Islands. The Line Islands are part of a nation called Kiribati, which is actually spelled Kiribati. That could be another day in another video. But the Line Islands, the southernmost of the Line Islands, is one of the closest to Point Nemo. Another one is Antarctica itself. The Antarctic mainland into the Pacific Ocean is another one of those pod points, as they call it, to triangulate as the closest points of land to Point Nemo. And has anybody ever been to Point Nemo? The answer is no, and they likely never will. Unless at some point down the road there's a reason to retrieve some of the space junk, or if there's, as I say, the ISS is sent crashing into there in 2031, and there's some reason to retrieve it, I cannot ever see anybody visiting this location. If I had, this is where I would typically put, in a future edit of this video, I could put pictures in, but I wouldn't have one. because there are no pictures of Point Nemo that exist. Nobody has ever been there. It's one of the very few places on the planet which has become completely untouched by humans. Not even the most remote island in the world can say that, because Bouvet Island, which is kind of on the opposite side of the world, literally, but similar latitude from Point Nemo, was claimed by the Norwegians, is Norwegian territory, and gets visited by a Norwegian scientific ship about once every 2 or 3 years. Point Nemo is not in any international jurisdiction. Nobody lays claim to it, and there's no reason for anybody to ever do so, because there's no economic advantage to claim this part of the ocean for any reason. There's no fishing here, no economic activity, nothing can be generated from here. There's no oil deposits, for example, under this part of the ocean at all. There's just nothing. Even Antarctica has land claims for scientific purposes. This place has none. Point Nemo has not even a scientific reason for it to be claimed by anybody. There's no advantage to any country claiming this part of the ocean. That's kind of why it's designated as the crash landing spot for various satellites and space junk, is because there's no chance of hitting anybody. There's not even really much of a chance of hitting any ocean life. So this is literally a no harm, no foul landing spot for space satellites and junk from any country in the world. Of course, the ISS is a internationally built space vehicle, combination of the United States, the Russian Federation, and even the Canadians are in on it. But there's no harm to anybody, because Point Nemo doesn't belong to any country. And so that is the story of Point Nemo, discovered in 1992 by a Croatian engineer who triangulated using OpenStreetMap and Google Maps data, Google Earth data, to calculate and triangulate the location. About 48 degrees south and 123 degrees west in the South Pacific Ocean. The furthest point from any landmass in the world. So I am taping the same day. It's Wednesday. It's hump day. Enjoy your week, everyone. And as I always like to say to everyone, y'all, peace out, homies.